All right. It is my desire more than anything that truth is revealed. And so I pray that I don't hinder that in any way. I pray that the Lord will be able to speak through me this morning. So I ask you to pray for me as I bring this message. As I said, this is a very familiar passage of Scripture. John chapter 4. The story of the Samaritan woman. This is one that I preached often. It's one that I teach about often because there is so much in the story that relates to so many people that have struggled with baggage and are blinded to what Christ wants them to know. And so I pray that this morning that the Lord would use me and speak through me to be able to bring you this truth. We're in week 4, and I'm going to open again with this exact same passage that I've been opening all along in this series, and that is found in 1 John chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. One of Jesus' apostles, a very dear and close friend, possibly his closest friend, is the one that shared this information with us. And so let's look at it again. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our own eyes, which we looked upon and have even touched with our hands concerning the word of life. You know, John is saying, I was with him. I saw him. I touched him. I listened to him. I heard his teaching. The life that was manifest, we've seen it. We testify to it. We proclaim to you the eternal life which was with the Father and was made manifest to us. That which we have seen and heard, we proclaim it also to you, so that you too may have the fellowship with us. And indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son, Jesus Christ. And then he goes on in this verse and he says, and it brings me great joy to share this with you. I've heard the question asked before, I wonder what it would have been like to have lived 2,000 years ago in the days of Jesus, to have walked in Galilee and Judea and to have actually physically been there, to have heard him, to possibly have been able to have had a conversation with him, to have even touched him or stood close to him. Have you ever wondered what it would have been like to see the very Son of God in the flesh and be able to sit there? You know, one of the experiences that has affected me more than any in my travels to Israel, I've been there twice now, and I'm looking forward to going again this coming January, or this next January of 2022. We're putting it together. We're planning on making this happen. Is going to a synagogue that has been discovered in Magdala and being able to walk in on that floor that they've uncovered now and being able to lean over this little short wall and lay your hand on that floor that Jesus would have physically stood on. And to see that replica of that seat sitting in the middle that he would have sat down on as he would have taught in this synagogue. And this would have been something that he would have done on a pretty often basis. And the idea of standing, when I'm standing there, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, what would it have been like to have been in this crowd that was sitting and standing around him and leaning against the pillars of that building and stuff, and looking at him with my own eyes and watching him teach and listening with my own ears to the words that he was sharing and stuff. John says, I heard him. I stood there and I've seen him. I've even touched him. I've said to you in this series earlier that it is still possible for us to hear, to see, and to even touch him. I have. Those of you that have walked with him and have that relationship with him can say the same thing, because I've heard the truth of his word through Scripture as the Holy Spirit reveals it to me. You know, I've seen his hand work in my life in ways that are unexplainable in every other way except for one, and that is that the Lord had to have a hand in that. He had to orchestrate those events. He had to create this. He had to cause this to happen. And I know that I know that I know that I have touched his heart with my repentant heart, that he has forgiven me, and that he has given me the confidence to walk with him and to speak for him and speak of him. I know I've touched him because he's touched me. This era that Jesus lived in, as I've said to you before, was an extremely dangerous era to live in for those who professed to be a follower of his, for those who claimed him to be a friend. It took a lot of courage to be a follower of Jesus in this time because there were threats, there were persecutions. He was hated. As much as he was loved by many, he was hated by many as well. And that hatred gained intensity in the 3.5 years that we have a record of his ministry prior to his crucifixion. The hatred for him continued to grow more and more intense all of the time. And anyone who was associated with him, anyone who bore his name, anyone who claimed to love him was at risk. The teachings of Jesus were so radically different from that of what the religious were bringing about at that time. He couldn't be, according to their opinion, he couldn't be of God because his teachings were nothing that resembled the teachings of the Pharisees, the religious people of that day. I can say, though, without reservation, that if you have the courage to live for Christ, if you are able to stand up for your faith in him, Christ will begin to reveal himself to you in ways that you've never experienced yet. You see, many of us have never really fully understood who he is and have not really come to know him as we can, simply because we lack the courage to proclaim him as our Savior. We lack the courage to stand up for the faith that we hold dear. It took courage, as I said, in this time to be a friend of his, to proclaim him as Messiah. The same is true today, isn't it? We're facing more and more persecution. The intensity is building and it's growing. And it's going to take courage, more so than we've ever experienced before in the days to come, to stand up, to stand for our faith, to speak openly about our belief in Jesus Christ and the sin of this world. When we start speaking of sin in this world, we're going to get hit. We're going to pay a price. It's going to cost us. But if we really, really want to know Christ, and I'm telling you, this is a great opportunity, the things that we're seeing happening in our political landscape and around us in this world, the church is being given an opportunity to come to know Christ at a deeper level than it's ever known him before. Because we're going to find out exactly who really, truly is the church, and who is going to be persecuted and who is going to stand up and pay the price for being called Christian. Because we are in a political system that is hostile towards conservative Christians and those who hold to Judeo-Christian values. And we're going to get pushed, and we're going to get tested, and we're going to get attacked, and we're going to get persecuted. But when that happens, we are going to go deeper in our relationship with Jesus. We're going to see him do things that we've never yet experienced in our lives. Amen. How exciting is that? How exciting is it that the church is finally going to begin to make a difference and stand in a culture that opposes it openly? Are you a part of that church? Well, we've looked through the eyes of Peter, we've looked through the eyes of Judas, and we've even looked through the eyes of Pilate. The first two, Peter and Judas, were two men that did listen to him regularly. They saw him every day. They touched him on a regular basis. They witnessed all of the events that he did, and yet these two men with the identical experiences had two completely different outcomes. Last week, we began to look at an individual that did not have the same privilege of being with him, seeing him, hearing him, had never heard him preach, never seen him perform a miracle, probably didn't know him or know anything about him until the one and only encounter he would ever have with him, and that was Pilate. And we saw the outcome of his life. We saw how he was blinded still and remained in that sense of blindness even after he stood face to face with truth and he was able to have a conversation with him. He was able to ask questions and was given opportunity to change the trajectory of his life, and yet he still remained blind. Now, I think we unpacked why that happened. Because Pilate was a man who was constantly exposed to religion. Not only to Judaism and what he saw in a monotheistic type of worship, to where the Jews worshiped one God and one God only, but he grew up in a culture of pantheism, which was the worship of multiple gods, a God for this and a God for that and all. And so, knowing that about his history, knowing that about the culture in which he was raised, it would be a normal, natural assumption that Pilate had had his fill of religion. This philosopher said, this is truth. This philosopher said, that is truth. And there was a constant argument of what is truth. And then he finds himself dealing with the Jews on a somewhat regular basis, and they're claiming that they have the truth. It's therefore the question before Jesus that he asked, what is truth? How do you know? And he walks away. At the very moment he could have received the truth and come to know the truth. But he had already checked out. He was so blinded by religion that he didn't feel it was possible to know the truth. And we know the outcome of his life. I'm afraid that you and I are around people of the same mindset. We work with them. We share our communities with them. We serve on different boards and committees and all with people that they've had it up to here with religion, and they are so cold and they are so blind that the truth it cannot penetrate their hearts. Well, in some ways, I think the woman that we're going to look at today is somewhat like Pilate. She was a woman that had never had an encounter with him, never heard him preach, never seen him perform a miracle, never touched him before. Just like Pilate had had no previous association with Jesus at all. She too was probably done and had her fill of religion as well because of the life that she found herself living. She was probably up to here with the culture in which she lived in because it was critical, it was judgmental. She was a woman that obviously lived a very lonely life and was isolated most of the time. It was the pain and rejection of life that caused her to be who we'll see her to be. A woman that found herself living a life where she never really knew real love and genuine love. A life that she never really knew what it meant to be embraced and loved for who she is. This life had left her pretty bitter, left her very alone. Well, see, Pilate had settled the idea about truth in his mind, and I think she might have been at the very same place in her life when this man named Jesus comes walking into her life and completely turns her world upside down. What you'll see today is this woman, though she's very similar to Pilate in many ways, her life has a completely opposite outcome. Just like we saw with Peter and with Judas. Many people go through life and they just think that things happen, that there's coincidences in life that take place, or happenstance, if you will, that fate tends to drive the direction of their life. And we hear phrases like, man, that was sure lucky. Boy, you were really lucky in that situation. Maybe a near-death experience or a car accident or a cure to a health issue that maybe you found yourself battling. And then we also hear people make statements like this. This is the one that I love. It drives me nuts when I hear it. Well, I guess everything happens for a reason. I just want to slap people when I hear that. I guess everything happens for a reason. I want you to look at your outline, because I'm going to unpack this. God's love for us is so great that He is constantly, listen to me, creating opportunities in our life for the sole purpose of revealing truth to us. Things don't just happen. Listen carefully to me, because this is a hard pill to swallow, especially when you're dealing with bad stuff in your life. You don't like the idea that God has His hand in that. We hate that. This is why we don't like to study the book of Job. It's why we don't like to look at certain passages where the Lord brought an evil spirit upon that person, or this was done or that was done, and that makes us uncomfortable. So we start trying to make excuses for God. Well, God really didn't do that. He just allowed that. Things don't just happen. We have got to get our minds, as followers of Christ, we have got to get our minds to divorce itself from a love for this world. Because that's what causes us to try to explain God. To try to figure out, why did this bad thing happen? Well, God couldn't have done anything like that. He just allowed it to take place. Such a cop-out. Nothing, listen to me carefully, and you ain't going to like this, but nothing is outside the sovereign will of God. Not even Satan and all of his angels and demons are outside or separated from the sovereign will of God. And until we mature in our faith to the point we can believe that, we are always going to struggle with issues in our lives and things just happening. And there's got to be a reason for everything. There's got to be a reason. When someone dies that we love, we hear that phrase a lot. Well, there's got to be a reason. When we lose a job, well, there's got to be a reason. And when our health goes south and it gets really bad and the doctor gives us news that just grips us, or when it happens to a loved one like that, then here's the excuse, or here's the thing that people say, well, there's got to be a reason. When a relationship fails, a marriage blows up, or a rift in a family among siblings and all, well, there's got to be a reason. Everything happens for a reason. It makes me sick when I hear that. Everything happens for one reason. Let me just explain it. Everything happens for one reason. Everything. Doesn't matter whether it's good. It doesn't matter whether it's bad. Everything happens for a reason. Suffering through a circumstance, suffering through the loss of a loved one, suffering through a failed marriage, suffering through a bad health issue, suffering can bring us, it can become one of the greatest blessings we've ever experienced in our life. Because this suffering, everything, listen to me, happens for one reason. Not a reason, one reason. To turn our focus, to turn our attention to God, and to cause us to break and divorce ourselves from our love for this world and begin to desire another world. And begin to desire God's will. And sometimes that cannot happen with us until we go through some of the most god-awful, painful experiences in life. until we are fully broken, until we are fully crushed, will we ever look up and say, I want what you want for me. I want your son to return. I want your son to take me home. Paul said it well. To die is gain. Was he suicidal when he said that? No. He was not suicidal. He understood he could not love this world. And everything in this world will pass away. Your health is going to fail. You're going to bury loved ones, people you care dearly about. Children, spouses, parents, you're going to lose relationships. All of these things are going to go away. You're going to lose them all. Until you begin to love Him, until you begin to love the promise that He has for you, you will struggle to navigate this life. But when you can mature to that place where you understand that everything is in the sovereign will of God, and everything happens for one reason, to move me closer into a deeper, wiser knowledge and understanding of His will and who He is and His nature, until you can move into that, you will not navigate this world well. And oftentimes you will find yourself repeating mistakes that you've made over and over and over again, because you're more in love with this place than you are where He wants us to be. We've sang a song here many times. We haven't sung it in a long time, but the title of the song is Building 429 does it as this is not my world. I don't belong here. Oh, if we could truly sing a song like that and mean it. And mean it. I love my wife, and I love my family. I love my life. But may I never love it more than I love Him. And may I never desire to be here more than I want to be there. Because it is my love for there. It is my love for Him that fuels my love for the ones in my life here. And it helps me to see that if you can bless me like this here, Katie, bar the door, what have you got in store for me there? And knowing that helps me navigate this. Life had just beat the stuffing out of the woman that we're going to look at today. Many people can relate to this woman. Here was a woman that she never expected life to be any different. She never expected it to be any better. She thought, this is what it will be. I've come as far as I can go, or I've sunk as far as I can sink. Here she was in a normal routine of life, just going about what she did every day, going to the well, gathering water, bringing it home. But it's an amazing story of redemption and how much Christ loves us and how much Christ is unwilling to leave any of us where we are, but to bring more for us. This woman in her normal everyday routine would experience something that I'm afraid many miss because they're not watching. They're not looking for the activity of God in their lives. Let's pick the story up in chapter 4, verse 1. Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples. He left Judea and he parted again for Galilee. Now I'm going to explain why. He's leaving the southern part of Israel, and he's going to pass up through Samaria, and he's going to go up to the Galilean region, and why this journey happened. Verse 4, pay close attention to this. I'm going to revisit it in a little bit. He had to pass through Samaria. Just let me say to you right now, that's not a true statement. But before anybody bolts out of the door, Stick around and I'll explain to you why that's not necessarily true. He came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph, and Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour, about noon. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. You know, as we go through this story today, you're going to see that there's some really important details involved in this story that shape this story into a faith lesson for each and every one of us, no matter who we are, where we've come from, or what our life looks like. For instance, it was circumstances that led Jesus to leave Judea and to journey up through Samaria and head towards Israel, or towards the Galilee. I want you to look at your outline. Because normal things that we do every day are oftentimes orchestrated by God. There are always, look at this, changing events that happen in our lives that, will change the trajectory of our lives. We have to learn as followers of Christ to become sensitive to changing events in our lives. Because when something changes, when we are going through the normal routines that you and I do every day, and something changes, you better wake up and pay attention. I don't care how insignificant you think the change is or how big the change is. When there is a change of events in your normal activities of life, that can mean the loss of a loved one. It can mean your health going south. It can mean a lost relationship. It can mean the loss of a job or a change in your financial status or whatever. But anytime there is a change that happens in your normal, regular routine, you better know God's involved. And you need to understand He is about to change the trajectory of your life. You got to pay attention to that. And you need to learn to pay attention to the signals and what's going on and what could He be doing. And this is when you really need to get on your face before God and say, "Lord, in my flesh, I'm probably going to miss this. And I don't want to. You've got to help me see this. You've got to help me navigate through what's happening right now." Let me ask you a question. Why are any of you all even here? I've asked this question many, many times from this stage. Why are you here? How did you get here? You ever given any thought to that? Why are you here? Some of you been here and then you left and now you're back again. Why? You ever think about that? What's happened in your life? What changed? What has transpired in your life that's got you sitting right here this morning listening to this message? Some of you are sitting here going, "Hey, I've listened to you preach about this lots of times before." Okay, why are you here for listening to me preach about it again? Why? You ever thought about that? What's happened in your life that's caused you to decide to come to church or come back to church or even be here in the first place? What are the events that have changed? You got a Georgia boy and his wife sitting back there that the events of their life changed some years back. And now he's here. You ever wondered, Taylor, about all that? The rest of you could ask the same question. You know, how in the world did I end up here? Vibbard. Good night. Vibbard of all places. I just hired another boy this week that started work for me from Georgia. He's already been asking me about church and all that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking, how in the world did you end up like Taylor from Georgia up here, Kansas City? Now he's living in Excelsior Springs, Missouri. What is the deal with Georgia? Are they just a bunch of sinners? God trying to get them out of there and get them up to Missouri so y'all can get saved and come to Christ? I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out the own circumstances and the changing events in my life. Have you ever thought about that? Why me? Why here? How this? What's that? You ever ask those questions? God is moving pieces all the time. And we're oblivious to a lot of what He's up to and what He's doing. The reason it brought this woman to the well at this particular time of the day was she just needed water. That was the circumstance that got her at the well at noon on this particular day. The circumstance that got Jesus at that well was because of the Pharisees and the religious people in Judea was putting a plot together and putting a warrant out to arrest him and get him and kill him. And the pressure becomes so intense that he said, we need to leave and go to Galilee. Look at your outline, guys. Circumstances, pay attention to this, both good and bad, create opportunities to do, look at this, put us in places where we can come to know the truth. Yeah, I've got a job now that I never dreamed I'd ever be doing again, or I'd ever be a part of, or even considered being in a place like this. And in 120 days, I've already witnessed to and ministered to a young man that works for me, that his 19-year-old daughter was shot and killed on Southwest Traffic Way within 30 days of starting there. A little over a week ago, I put a Spanish Bible in his hand, a New Believer's Bible, showed him how to use it and how to read. The next day he came to me and he said, can I get this in English? I want my other two daughters to have a Bible. If they can't read Spanish, they read English. Can you get me a Bible like this for them? He had already read through the whole first section. About 30 days ago, I had a chance to minister another service man that works for me that got a phone call mid-morning that his wife tried to commit suicide that morning. I found myself taking him home, praying with him and ministering to him and trying to encourage him as he wept and cried over why. He didn't know why and all. And I gave him a Spanish Bible as well. I've had the opportunity to witness to different ones that have worked there and come through, and it's amazing just the opportunities that the Lord has presented. And I'm going to tell you, on July the 9th, I had no idea I would be here, and on July the 10th, I thought this is the dumbest thing in the world that somebody could be asking me to do right now. And yet here I am. When events change in your life, God is about to change the trajectory of your life. Are you ready for the ride? Because I'm telling you, there are times and even still days that I wonder, am I really ready for this type of ride? But it doesn't make any difference. God is moving pieces, and He's putting us where He wants us to be for His purpose and for His reason. And we cannot question those. When they come, we go. We have to go. We don't have options, or we shouldn't have. Jesus is about to change the trajectory of this woman's life because of a simple, normal, routine event that took place that circumstances have driven them to. You say, well, this woman just needed water. What's so significant about that? We're going to talk about why she needed water in just a moment. First of all, let's figure out why Jesus ended up in Samaria. I said earlier in verse 4 that that's not true. He did not have to go through Samaria. Look at verses 3 and 4. He left Judea, departed again for Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. That's not right. That's not necessarily true. We see in the English language it says he had to go, but that's not what that word means. It means he was behooved to go. In other words, he intended to go. It was something he felt he needed to do. But he did not have to go, because Jews did not go through Samaria to get to the northern end of Israel to land in Galilee. They traveled west to the Via Maris, and they went up through the trade route up into that area of the Megiddo, and they would go into Nazareth and cross over, and they would end up over in Capernaum or someplace around the Galilee. Or they would leave Jerusalem and go directly east to Jericho, cross the Jordan, go up the other side of Jordan. He did not have to go through Samaria. He must needs go through Samaria. I think the King James Version is how it puts it. He must needs go through Samaria. Why? Because there was an ordained appointment at a well with a woman who was involved in a daily normal routine, and she was about to get her world turned upside down. Pay attention to the changing events of your life. This route was divinely ordained so that this woman could come to know Jesus. Everything happens for a reason. No, it happens for one reason. Let me just say this right now. Had this woman's life not been what it was, had this woman not lived through and dealt with all the hell that she experienced in her life, because we don't know nothing about her childhood. We don't know if this woman was a little foster girl. We don't know, or an orphan. We don't know if she grew up in a house where a father abused her, or whether she was horribly neglected. We don't know what kind of life she experienced, what kind of all the bad, horrible things that may have happened in her. We don't know anything about that, but I'm going to tell you right now, if it were not for that type of life, if she had not gone through the things that she did, if it wasn't for all of those circumstances, those events, yes, bad, this encounter most likely would have never taken place. You're going to understand that in just a minute. I want you to go to your outline. Many of the circumstances of our lives are divinely ordained. Sometimes people say, well, that's an interesting turn of events. You ever heard that phrase before? That's kind of like, well, there's a reason for everything. Everything happens for a reason. That's an interesting turn of events. It is interesting, but it's not accidental, nor is it coincidental. Maybe you're someone that has an intellectual knowledge of who Jesus is. I want to slow down and address this for a moment. Maybe you're an individual that has an intellectual knowledge or a belief of Christ. You know Him here. You've been in Sunday school. You've got all the answers, the Sunday school answers. You're really familiar, maybe pretty familiar with religious activities that have taken place or transpired within the church. But you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus. You say, oh yeah, I do. I go to church on a regular basis. I even give money once in a while. I've signed up for a ministry team. Hey, I'm going to help out in the nursery, or I'm going to help out with them knothead 5th grade, 6th grade boys, while y'all have your Valentine's thing in here. That ought to get me some points in heaven. Surely that makes me a Christian. Maybe that's the mindset that you've got. You have an intellectual understanding and knowledge of Christ, but you don't have a personal relationship with Him because you've never had a personal experience with Him. You don't know what it's like to walk with Him and to allow Him to lead and direct and recognize His activity in the events of your life. For others of you that have trusted Christ, you do know Him. You have a personal relationship with Him. Maybe this story to you is a stark reminder of just how much He loves you and how much He cares for you. How much He wants to affect your life and change your life. In verses 6 and 7, it was said the 6th hour. This woman is at a well in the middle of the day at noon. You say, so? What's the big deal about that? Nobody went to the well at noon. Nobody gathered water in the heat of the day. It's stupid. Why would you? You need water in the morning when the family is rising out of bed. So you go to the well in the early hours of the morning when it's cooler. You go to the well in the evening, in the late evening hours when it's cooler. You don't go in the middle of the day and pack water. This is in there for a reason, for us to understand something's going on in this woman's life. Why would she go at noon in the middle of the day when everybody else is in the morning and the evening? Besides, do you know this well wasn't the closest well to Sychar? There were other wells that were closer. She didn't go to them. She traveled a mile to get to this well. And she did it by herself. She was alone. Notice the story says Jesus was sitting there resting while His disciples went into town to get some food. And she came. There ain't nobody else around. She's all alone. Where's her girlfriends at? Where's her BFSs at? She ain't got none. She doesn't have any. Women never ever go to the bathroom by themselves. This should be our first clue. This woman wasn't well liked. Look at your outline. Events of our past often put our lives on a trajectory that convinces us that nothing can ever be any different or any better. I think we're going to see this reflected in her attitude. See, life doesn't always turn out quite like what we thought, does it? Anybody testify to that? Do I have a witness? It doesn't always turn out like we wanted it to or like we thought. Sometimes things happen and life changes really drastically. Life had taken a toll on this woman's life to the degree that she felt nothing but shame and guilt about her life. She didn't go gather with other women. She gathered by herself. I think a lot of people deal with issues from their past that keep them unsettled. And they battle with companions called shame and guilt. And they've learned to be familiar enough with them that they're comfortable with them. And I think that's probably what had happened with this woman. How many of you have ever had thoughts that go through your minds that, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Anybody ever struggle with that? Anybody ever think, man, if I could just go back and change it, if I could just go back and redo? I think this woman felt that way. How many of you would be embarrassed to share some of your past with others? This woman, she had learned that a life of isolation was probably the easiest thing for her. Let's track the conversation. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" For Jews have nothing to do with Samaria. There were racial tensions like you can't imagine between the Jews and the Samaritans. Because the Samaritans were considered to the Jew a half-breed. They weren't full-blooded Jew. And there was tremendous racial tension among them. This is why Jews didn't pass through Samaria. That's why they used the other two routes. But Jesus said, I must needs go through Samaria. I have an appointment with a woman that needs to know I love her. Jesus said to her, well, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that's saying to you, give me a drink, you would ask him. He'd give you living water. And the woman responds sarcastically and just basically out of her own nature of being bitter. She said, you have nothing to draw water with. The well's deep. Where do you get this living water? You greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well? He drank from it himself as his sons and his livestock. And then Jesus says to her, you know, ma'am, everybody that drinks this water, they're going to thirst again. But the water I'm talking about, the water that I want to give you, you'll never be thirsty again. See, the water that I will give you will become a well of spring water that will just well up inside of you to eternal life. It's a different water that I'm talking about, ma'am. The woman said, then give me that water. And I not have to come and be thirsty and come to this well anymore to draw water. Give me that water. And Jesus, oh man, now he's getting real personal. I'm learning in 30 years of pastoral ministry, Dinah gets aggravated at me. She says, you're doing more talking than listening. I said, I'm tired of hearing the same story over and over and over again. I'm tired of hearing the same excuses over and over and over again because I know what's going to come out of their mouths. Let's just cut to the chase. Let's get personal and let's fix this thing if we can. And that's exactly what Jesus is doing here. I get weary of listening to the same excuses as to why somebody did this or did that or didn't do this or didn't do that because they're all the same pretty much. Jesus said to her, go call your husband. Call your husband, come here, and I'm going to explain it to you and him. The woman answers. I can just hear the tone of her voice changing right now. No longer the sarcasm that was previously. She's now caught. She's now having to address the reality of her life. And she says, I have no husband. And Jesus says, you're right. You're right in saying you have no husband, for you've had 5. You've been married 5 times. And the man you're living with right now, he's not your husband. Was Jesus saying this to add insult to injury? She knew the life she had lived. She knew where she was. As far as all the people in her culture and the community knew, she was just a little tramp. You know, they were probably scared to death she'd end up in bed with one of their husbands before things were over with. You're right in saying that you have no husband. You've had 5. Many people, my heart breaks for this woman because I know that many people can relate to her because of the train wreck of their life and the way life has turned out and what has taken place in their life, that they have become very reluctant to reach out to Christ because they think the only way to get to Him is through religious people. And what do religious people have a tendency to do? Judge a woman that's had 5 husbands and sleeping with the 6th one right now. And that doesn't count any of the others that have been along the way. This woman's used up. Her body is just used up because the only thing she's ever experienced in life is that men want her for one reason and one reason alone. Ask her the question, what does real, genuine love look like? And she's clueless. She's going to say, I have no idea because I've never known it. I've never experienced it. There's so many people that won't come to Christ, or they want nothing to do with Christ. They don't want to hear the truth because they can't get through the church. They can't get through religious people. And the culture also blinds them to being able to hear the truth. I got to say to those that may be here where this woman is at, it's very true. Religious people are not very friendly oftentimes. Religious people in churches can be horribly hard-hearted. But here's the flip side of the coin. This woman's judging Jesus based on religious people. She's judging Jesus based on how she's been judged. Let me say this. Look at your outline, guys. No one comes to the Father without an encounter with Jesus. So please, if you're of this mindset, listen very carefully. Don't judge Jesus by past experiences with religious people. Don't judge Jesus by your past experience with religious people. You see, this woman had already sized Jesus up. It's evident in the conversation, the dialogue that they were having when Jesus asked her for a drink of water. She had already sized him up. Who are you? A man and a Jew would be asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink of water. She had done past judgment on who he was and what he was. And many people have done the same thing with Jesus. They've already passed judgment on him, and therefore you can't seem to penetrate their heart with the truth of the gospel because they've already judged Jesus based on their experience with church and with religion. Here was a woman that I guarantee you, as a little girl growing up, she just wanted to know purpose in life. She just wanted to have a normal life. She just wanted to be loved. She just wanted to be cared for. She wanted to be like others, but something happened, something transpired, something took place that derailed this woman and sent her down a path that she began to feel completely and totally hopeless, and there would never be a change. There would never be anything else for her. And she was mad at everybody and didn't know who to blame. So she just blamed everybody, including Jesus. Jesus knew this woman had made bad choices when he said, go get your husband. He was setting her up. For what? To embarrass her? No. To finally open her eyes to where she could see the truth. Go get your husband. I have no husband. Oh yeah, you have. You've had 5 of them. And you got another man right now. How's those wells satisfying your thirst? That's basically what he's asking her. You keep drinking from the wrong well, ma'am. Jesus knew this woman had made bad choices, but his love would not allow him to do nothing. He loved her too much. He cared too much. And he wanted her to know the truth. He wanted her to know that he valued her. This woman had a natural thirst for life. She was no different than any other little girl growing up or any other woman in the world. All of us have a natural, inherent love for life, a thirst for life. God, that is imputed into us by God himself. A hunger, a thirst for life. To live it to the fullest, to live it out loud, to experience all that we can from life. That is something God imputes into us as a created being. This woman was no different. But regardless of whatever well she kept drinking from, nothing satisfied that thirst. Anybody have a testimony you want to share right now? Because that's what happens. We have had this life, this amazing thirst for life imputed into our souls, and we want life to be an amazing experience, and we want the most out of life. And so what do we end up doing in our flesh? We go drinking out of the wrong wells. And we are satisfied for a time, and then all at once we become thirsty again. And then we need more of that well. And we go back to get more, and we are less satisfied, and the satisfaction is shorter and shorter and shorter. And we realize that there is no well that seemingly that can quench this thirst for life, and we just give up. And I think this woman gave up. I don't know what started her down this road of lies, but Jesus is about to get her to an intersection and put her on a different road. He's about to give her water that she will realize, for once in my life, satisfies me. Well, some of you, like her, you've been drinking from the wrong wells. Look at your outline. In an attempt to quench this inherent thirst for life that God breathed into each of us, our tendency is to continue to drink from wells that cannot satisfy. The problem is this. We fail to realize that the one who created the thirst for life in us is the only one who can satisfy it. Do you hear what I just said? The one who has imputed this crazy thirst for living, for having life to the fullest, is the only one that can satisfy that thirst. But we reject him, we ignore him, we turn our backs away from him, and we keep chasing and drinking out of these wells that can never satisfy us. Jeremiah said this in chapter 2, verse 13, "My people have committed 2 evils. One is they've forsaken me. They've turned their back on me, the fountain of living waters, to hew for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water." There's only one person that can give us living water. There's only one person that can satisfy that amazing thirst for living. that's Jesus. He's the only one. Jesus said in John 10:10, it's a thief that wants to steal from you. He's the one that wants to kill you. He's the one that wants to destroy you. I want you to have life. I want you to have it abundantly. This world had stolen this woman's life. Jesus is about to give it back to her. Amen. Question is this: has your life been redeemed? Have you come to a place where you no longer look to the world for the quenching of that thirst? Have you come to a place where you realize that Jesus is the only one that can quench this thirst of mine for life and for living? And He wants to do so much in and through you. He wants to pour Himself in and through you. What was it He said to this woman? Oh, this is water that wells up like a spring in you, and it flows out into eternal life. And others can come and drink of that same water and experience that exact same thing, but we just keep going back to the water of the world. I perceive that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is a place where people ought to worship. And Jesus said, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem are you going to worship the Father. She's going down a road of religion. Okay, I can fix my life then by religion. And He goes, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know. For salvation does come through the Jews. It comes through me. Trying to give her a history lesson here, but He didn't go on and expand on it. But then He says the hour's coming, and it's actually now here, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. And the woman said, I know that HaMashiach, I know that Messiah is coming, the Christ. I know when He comes, He will tell us all things. He will tell us the truth. And man, He does something here that blows my mind. Jesus would not reveal who He was to the religious. Jesus would not explain who He was to the religious. But He's more than willing, you catch this, He's more than willing to reveal who He is to a woman of 5 husbands and living with a man. A woman whose life had just been beat up and wore out and abused and used up. And He says, I want to tell you a secret that I won't tell to religious folk. I'm He. I'm HaMashiach. I am the Christ, and I'm telling you the truth right now. On your outline, religion, hear me, will blind you from being able to see the truth of who Jesus really is and what He wants to do in and through your life. In Matthew 11:25 and 26, at that time that Jesus declared, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and the understanding, but you've revealed them to the children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. Going to church, being baptized, serving on a ministry team, joining a life group, none of these things will save you, nor redeem you, nor will they satisfy you apart from a relationship with Jesus. Because these are simply tools of investigation. These are simply tools that lead us and help us to find our way into a deeper understanding of Jesus Christ and into a deeper relationship with Him. They're just tools. They're just symbols. They're just ceremonies of things that reflect that we do know the truth, that we have understood and come to know truth, and that truth is a man, it is a person, it is Jesus Christ. All of those things are important, but none of them are sufficient. Only learning to walk with Jesus and trusting Him with salvation is going to ever fill that void that is in you. That thirst for life. that thirst for life. The Spirit and the bride say in Revelation 22, "Come." Let the one who hears say, "Come." And let the one who is thirsty come. And let him who desires take the water of life without price. Again, just because you believe all the right things, just because you attend church, just because you serve, you give, none of that matters. None of those things will ever satisfy you apart from a relationship with Jesus Christ. So the final question today is this. It's your takeaway. Do I have a genuine walking, talking relationship with Jesus that I engage in every day that brings joy and peace and confidence in my life? Or am I simply a religious person that does religious things? That question is for those who sit in church that may be living under a deception. Well, if we go on and we were to read the rest of the story, we're going to find out that this woman, after she responded to Jesus, she runs back to her village. Not quite so alone anymore, it seems. So the woman left her water pot and went into the city and said to the men, "Come see a man who told me all things that I have done." He didn't condemn me of all things that I had done. He just told me about them. He told me he knew. He knew. But he still loves me. And he still shared the truth with me. Come and see. Come and see a man who told me all things. And see if this is not the Christ.